right, hello everyone, and welcome to this session entitled Designing Engaging Microlectures. I am super excited to be with you all today to explore how you can level up your instructional game with microlectures. And if you haven't yet done so, I'd love to have you introduce yourself in the chat by sharing your name, your role, and your institution. And while you're doing that, I'm just going to go through a few virtual meeting norms. So first of all, we'll be keeping our mics muted just to minimize any sort of background noise, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't communicate. I am a huge believer in two-way communication, so please feel free to share your thoughts, questions, ideas, repeat requests. All of that can go in the chat. And then along with that, if you'd like to do so, you're more than welcome to turn on your camera. It's always great to see smiling faces on the screen, but I also completely understand if you choose not to. And we'll be using our Zoom reactions button quite a bit in the session. So I'll be checking with you all regularly. So please feel free to use that little happy face icon to share your reactions throughout our workshop today. So greetings, my name is Tolu Noah, and I've been working in the field of education for over 18 years now in various contexts. My journey actually began as a classroom teacher. So I taught 5th and 6th grade language arts and social studies here in Los Angeles for about 9 years. And then after that, I transitioned to higher education and became an associate professor in the undergraduate teacher education program at Azusa Pacific University, where I taught for 7 years. And then I pivoted into the corporate ed tech world for a bit and was a senior professional learning specialist at Apple, helping K-12 educators and college professors learn about how they could use iPads and MacBooks to enhance teaching and learning. And I'm now back in academia working as a faculty developer at California State University, Long Beach here in Southern California. So you can find me on Twitter at Dr. Tolu Noah, and you can share any takeaways you have from the session using the conference hashtag TLTCon23. All right, so here's our agenda for today. We're going to begin by discussing what microlectures are, the benefits of microlectures, tools for creating microlectures, a planning template that can help you when you're designing microlectures, and then we'll also discuss some recording tips, accessibility and sharing considerations. We'll do an action plan and reflection, and then we'll wrap up with some closing information and feedback. And we do have a pretty ambitious agenda for today, so we'll try to do what we can within the time that we have. And our 3 goals for today are that we'll be able to describe the characteristics and benefits of microlectures, identify different tools that can be used to create microlectures, and then describe important factors to consider when recording and sharing microlectures. And we're going to start off with what microlectures are. And to do that, we're actually going to talk about what they're not. So I'm going to begin just by sharing that microlectures are not like traditional instructional videos. And I'm going to share a few common issues that arise with traditional instructional videos. And I do want to preface this by saying that these are general statements, so they don't apply to every single instructional video out there. But in general, traditional instructional videos, first of all, tend to be long. So a professor might record an entire 60-minute or longer lecture and then ask students to watch that all at once. Traditional instructional videos also tend to be content heavy. So the video might address a variety of concepts and skills. They also tend to be passive, where students are mostly just watching and listening. And in some cases, they can feel a little bit distant, where there feels like there's some sort of a disconnect between the instructor and the students who are watching. So we're going to pause for our first chat. And my question for you all is, how might these factors create inadvertent barriers for learners? So I'll give you a moment to share some thoughts in the chat. Okay, we've got a lot of great ideas coming up in the chat. So Carrie says screen fatigue from long videos. Megan says it inhibits a sense of belonging. Dana says not very engaging, difficult to lose focus throughout a long video. Agreed. Valerie says learners might not feel that they need to focus deeply. Barbara says sessions will be uninteresting for students. And I'm seeing similar comments about losing focus, lack of interaction, time constraints, not engaging. Attention is lost quickly. So many really great ideas that are shared in the chat. And yes, I fully agree with all of you. So long videos definitely make it challenging for students to focus, and I would say for anyone to focus. Content heavy videos can be difficult for students to digest. And I see a comment from Chanda in the chat about the retention issues, right? So if we put too much information in there, are students really going to retain all of that? Also, if it's passive, it's going to make it hard for students to actually process what they're learning and apply it, which is what we ultimately hope they'll be able to do. And I love what was mentioned in the chat about that sense of belonging and the connection piece being really, really important. So thank you all for sharing those wonderful ideas in the chat. And this is where micro lectures come in handy as a helpful alternative. So Zhang defines micro lectures as a short video, usually produced by the instructor, that explains a single key concept or a specific skill. So unlike traditional instructional videos that address a ton of concepts and skills, micro lectures really zoom in and focus on just one concept or one skill at a time. And according to Zhang, micro lectures have 3 really important characteristics. So first of all, they're brief. Micro lectures are typically shorter than 10 minutes, and a lot of instructors will actually aim more for 5 to 6 minutes. So why might we want to make it that short? Well, research actually shows that the longer the video, the less likely students are to remain engaged in watching it. So the sweet spot is actually about 6 minutes, but definitely no longer than 10 before student engagement starts to drop off. So we want to ideally try to keep our videos, around that length. Second, micro lectures are personal. So in other words, they do convey this sense of instructor presence. And third, micro lectures are interactive. So this means that they actually include active learning opportunities where students can directly engage with the content, with their peers, or with you as the instructor. So this can be in the form of what Zhang calls pause points, where you actually tell students in the video, pause the video here to complete some sort of activity, whether that's a reflection, an observation, a quiz, a writing exercise, anything like that. And one thing you might be thinking right now is, okay, Tolu, I see where you're headed. I like this vision, but my students really do need to know everything that I would cover in my 60-minute lecture video. And I think this is where chunking comes into play, right? So instead of giving students a full 1-hour video to watch, think about how can you break it up into smaller digestible chunks where each chunk kind of focuses on one specific concept or skill. And once again, we're factoring in these pieces about it being brief, personal, and interactive. Now, along with those 3 key characteristics we just talked about, it's also important to keep some general video design principles in mind. And Meyer, who's kind of like the godfather of video design principles, has actually identified about 14 different research-based principles that are helpful with videos. I'm not going to talk about all 14. I just want to highlight 4 that specifically can help with managing cognitive load. So having too much information coming at you at once. So the first principle is signaling. And this is all about making sure that when you're creating your videos, that you're pointing out important information so that students know what's key and what they need to be focusing on. So this can be done through things like verbal emphasis, so stressing things while you're talking in your videos. And it can also be done through visual cues. So, putting arrows on a slide or highlighting certain components or color coding. All of those are ways of communicating to our students, hey, this is what's important. A second key principle is segmenting. And this goes back to that concept of chunking the content into manageable pieces. So we want to think about when we're creating our videos, how can we kind of break it up into smaller segments so that it's easier for students to follow along and see how everything is connected. The third principle is weeding. And this is really, really important and probably the hardest part to do. This is where we want to get rid of any unnecessary information and visuals. So once again, focusing on what's our goal and only keeping things in there that really align with that goal. So in terms of unnecessary information and visuals, this can also include things like you don't want to have background music playing for the entire video because that can be a distracting content for some students. And you also want to think about the visuals that you have on your slides. So not keeping things super busy because then students don't know where their attention needs to focus on. And then the last principle is matching modality, which is about providing information in multiple formats. So a video should convey information both through visuals and through what's being said auditorily. We don't just want to stick with one of those modalities. So we're going to pause for another chat. And my question for you all this time is, which of the 4 video design principles would you like to be more intentional about or mindful of when creating instructional videos in the future? So I'll pause and give you a moment to share your thoughts there. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of weeding, and yeah, that can be the hardest part to do because there's so much content that we have to address. We want to make sure students get it all. I'm seeing a few mentioning segmenting, so really thinking about that chunking piece, some votes for signaling. Some said all of them. Yes. So thank you all for sharing those. And I think even just starting with these 4 can be really, really helpful in terms of improving the quality of our instructional videos for students or for faculty if you create instructional videos in that capacity too. So with that, we're going to actually watch a sample micro lecture that I created. And this micro lecture is based on one of the courses that I used to teach. So at APU, I taught courses like Intro to Teaching as a Profession and Diversity in the Classroom. And these courses are really focused on undergraduate students who are preparing to become classroom teachers. So in this micro lecture, I'm focusing on how students can design good objectives for their lesson plan. So you're going to kind of focus on that piece. And as you watch the micro lecture, I'd like you to keep the micro lecture characteristics of brief, personal, and interactive in mind, and also those 4 video design principles of signaling, segmenting, weeding, and matching modality. So I'm going to mute myself, and then I'll start the video in a moment. Hello students, Dr. Noah here. In this micro lecture, we're going to be discussing the essential question, what are the characteristics of effective learning objectives? In terms of our agenda for today, we're going to begin with retrieval practice. We'll then define objectives, discuss the criteria for effective objectives. We'll do an activity called effective or not. We'll talk about how what we're discussing today connects to what's coming up, and then we'll wrap up with an exit ticket. And our 3 outcomes for today are that you'll be able to define objectives, describe the characteristics of effective objectives, and then distinguish between effective and ineffective objectives. So we're going to begin with a retrieval practice activity just to review what we've talked about previously. So what I'd like you to do is either grab a sheet of paper or open up an app on your device, and you're going to write down everything you can remember about backwards design. Now remember, with retrieval practice, you're not looking at your notes or anything, you're just recalling from memory. So take a moment to pause this video, record everything you can remember about backwards design, and when you're ready, resume this video. Welcome back. So what we're going to do next is we're going to review backwards design, and as we do so, I encourage you to compare what you wrote during the retrieval practice to what we're reviewing now. So as a reminder, backwards design is all about planning with the end in mind, and there are 3 key stages. The first stage is developing the student learning goals. In other words, what should students know or be able to do by the end of the unit? The second stage is all about developing the assessment. In other words, what will you use to measure if students have actually accomplished the learning goals? And then the third stage is developing your instructional strategies. In other words, the specific activities and methods that you'll use to help students be successful with the assessment. So today's micro lecture is really going to focus on this first stage of developing student learning goals. We'll begin by defining the term objective. So objectives state what students should know or be able to do by the end of a particular lesson. In other words, it's a lesson goal. And it's really important that our lessons are goal-driven rather than activity-driven. Now, there are several criteria to keep in mind when it comes to developing your objectives, and we're just going to focus on 2 criteria for today. The first criteria is that your objectives should be student achievement based. What this means is that they should focus on what students should know or be able to do by the end of the lesson. And a really helpful way to ensure that your objectives are student achievement based is by starting off with the phrase, students will be able to, or SWABAT for short. The second important criteria we'll talk about today is making sure that your objectives are measurable. This means that there has to be some way to determine if students have actually accomplished the objective. So we're going to pause for another activity called effective or not. And what I'd like you to do is you're going to take out a sheet of paper or open up a writing app on your device, and you're going to number the page from 1 to 6. You're then going to read each of the objectives on this slide and write down whether each one is effective or not based on those 2 criteria that we just discussed. Once you're done with the activity, you can go ahead and resume this video. Welcome back. All right, so now we're going to go over the 6 statements and discuss whether they are effective or not. All right, so number 1 says students will be able to list the phases of the water cycle. So this objective is effective, right? So it's student achievement based, and it's using a measurable verb, which is list. So I could easily see if students have accomplished this objective by having them write down the different phases of the water cycle or label an image. Number 2 says students will be able to understand the major parts of speech in a sentence. This objective is actually ineffective. So although it's student achievement based, it's using a really vague verb, which is understand. So how do we know that someone understands something? Is it just because they're nodding and smiling at us? Probably not a really good measurement of their knowledge. So we would actually want to use a more specific verb here. So maybe instead of understand, I could say students will be able to identify the major parts of speech in a sentence, and I could easily measure that by giving them, some different sentences and having them label or color code the different parts of speech that are there. Number 3 says the teacher will present a lesson on ordering fractions with different denominators. So this one is probably pretty obviously ineffective because it's focusing on the teacher. And remember, it's not about you. It's about what your students will know and be able to do by the end of the lesson. Number 4 says students will be able to appreciate various forms of poetry, including sonnets and lyric poetry. This one is also ineffective. So although it's student achievement based, let's look at that verb, appreciate. Once again, how would you measure if someone could appreciate something? Is it because the students are in class and they're snapping along as they're listening to the poetry? Probably not. So while we definitely want students to appreciate things like that, we want to use a more measurable learning objective or learning goal here. So maybe instead of students will be able to appreciate various forms of poetry, its students will be able to describe various forms of poetry. All right, number 5 says students will be able to add fractions with like denominators. So this one is effective. It's student achievement based, and we could easily measure this by giving students some sample problems to solve. And then number 6 says students will be able to view scenes from the film version of The Crucible. So this objective is actually ineffective. So although it's student achievement based, look at what we're having them do. We're basically just saying they're watching a movie, which is not a learning objective, that is an activity. So once again, we want to focus on what students are going to know or be able to do as a result of this. So maybe they're going to be analyzing the themes or comparing and contrasting the characters. Those would be learning objectives. So as you can see, the verb plays a really significant role in whether or not your objectives are effective. So coming up, we're going to do a micro lecture on Bloom's taxonomy, which can be a really helpful framework for developing your objectives. And we're also going to talk about the process for deconstructing standards, or taking standards and turning them into student achievement-based and measurable objectives. So you can now hopefully define objectives, describe the characteristics of effective objectives, and distinguish between effective and ineffective objectives. And to wrap, we're going to do an exit ticket. So what I'd like you to do is either scan the QR code that you see here on the slide, or you can visit the link, the bit.ly link that's listed below, which is bit.ly/3kh93zg. And it will take you to a Google form that you'll submit just to do a quick knowledge check and reflection on what you've learned today. So please take a few minutes to complete the exit ticket, and I look forward to seeing you in our next micro lecture. Alrighty, so now that we've watched that sample micro lecture, we're actually going to do a hashtag discussion in the chat using one of my favorite thinking routines from Harvard's Project Zero, which is See, Feel, Think, Wonder. So in a moment, you're going to share a response to one of these 4 topics. Either see, what did you see or notice in the micro lecture? Feel, what feelings emerged for you as you watched the micro lecture? Think, what did this micro lecture make you think about? Or wonder, what questions do you have about the micro lecture and what do you wonder about it? And when you're sharing your response in the chat, please start it with the appropriate hashtag. So hashtag C or hashtag feel, just to make it easier to kind of follow along with, everyone's responses. So I'm going to pause and give you a moment to share at least one response using one of these hashtag responses. All right, and I see a lot of great ideas coming up in the chat. So Jen wondered what program I used to create this video. So I actually just used the Keynote app on the iPad, also works on the iPhone or MacBook. And they have a feature called live video where you can put video of yourself directly on your slides. And what I love about using the iPad is I can also just mark up the screen as I'm talking. So it makes it more engaging in that respect too. Let's see. Bridget says effective use of signaling, multiple means of representation with symbols and colors. Thanks, Bridget. Carrie says she saw instructor presence. Valerie also had the question about the app I used. And by the way, all the tools that I'm using, I'm going to provide access to these at the end too. And then Amanda wondered, do you have a good completion rate with the exit tickets? How do you grade or assess those? So I like using Google Forms for exit tickets because I can actually track like who's done what and see everything in spreadsheet form. And my goal is really just to, once again, get students thinking about the content. So I'm not grading it in the sense of it being right or wrong. It's more just trying to see, what are they thinking at this point in the process and what are they taking away from it? Cody says, I see you. I like the little face cam. Yes, makes it more personal. Thanks, Cody. I'm seeing a lot of other great examples. Kristen says, I feel like I learned these skills. Wonderful. Tim says, pause frequently to allow students to recall, do an activity. And there are so many more great ideas in the chat. So I encourage you to kind of scroll through and check out what other people said. Feel free to respond to each other too. And hopefully that was just a helpful, model of what it could look like when you are designing your micro lectures. Okay, so with that, we're going to move forward and talk about some of the benefits of micro lectures. And Scagnoli has identified benefits both for students and for faculty. So I'm going to start off with the student piece of things. So first of all, because micro lectures are recorded, they allow students to engage in self-paced learning. So students have the ability to pause, play, rewind as often as needed to review the content and to process it. Another benefit is that micro lectures allow for on-the-go learning. So because they're short and brief, students can really watch them anytime. And I think that's another benefit that we can really tap into. So in their book, Reach Everyone, Teach Everyone, Tobin and Beeling actually talk about how, short videos like that allow you to really maximize the micro moments in life, right? So if I'm waiting in line at the grocery store, I can watch a 5-minute video, right? But if it's a 60-minute video, not so much. So this really is, tapping into that mobile learning piece that we can really take advantage of. Along with that, micro lectures allow for more focused learning because once again, students aren't having to process 30 different concepts and skills all at once. They can focus on one, make sure they're good with that, and then build upon it in the future. And they also enhance learning because once again, students are actually doing something. They're not just taking in the information. And then on the faculty side of things, there are a few benefits as well. So they prompt us to break down our concepts and explain them in a very clear and concise fashion. They're also super versatile and can be used in any modality, and I'll share some examples in a moment. They can also be used to inform instruction. So you might want to use micro lectures as kind of something students do before class, and that way you can use the data that you get from the exit ticket to inform your lecture that day. So if students, have kind of mastered certain concepts, you don't need to teach those anymore. You can go deeper or maybe start, going into another topic. And then along with that, micro lectures can help you create a library of reusable content, which can reduce prep time down the line. And I'll share some tips for that a little bit later on. So I just mentioned that one of the benefits of micro lectures is the versatility aspect. And I just want to highlight that micro lectures really can be used in pretty much any modality. So if you teach fully online, they're great for presenting instructional content in manageable bites. If you teach on site, you can use micro lectures to supplement your class lectures. So if there's a concept that students have been struggling with, maybe create a micro lecture to address that instead of having to take class time to do that. If you teach hybrid, where some classes are on-site and some classes are online, maybe you want to use the micro lectures for the online components of the course. And micro lectures are also great for flipped instruction, where you're actually introducing the students to course concepts outside of class, so that class time can really be used for those higher order active learning activities where students are applying and analyzing and evaluating and creating. All right, so far so good. Let me know with a Zoom reaction if you're with me so far. Okay, I see some thumbs up popping up on the screen. Okay, perfect. So let's continue, and we're going to talk about some tools that can be used to create micro lectures, and there are tons of different options when it comes to this. So we're going to do a waterfall chat, and if you haven't done a waterfall chat before, the way it works is I'm going to display a question on the slide. You're going to type your answer in the chat box, but you're not going to press return or enter quite yet, so just let it sit there. And then on the count of 3, we'll all press return or enter, and that way all of the responses will come in at once. So my question for you all is, which tools have you used to create instructional videos? So once again, type your response in the chat, but don't press return or enter quite yet. And I'll give you a couple seconds to type your response. All right, and on the count of 3, we're all going to press return or enter. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so many great tools we're seeing here in the chat. So I'm seeing, let me scroll back up to the top here a bit. Studio, Teams, Camtasia, Panopto, Zoom, VoiceThread. Oh, I love VoiceThread. Screencastify, Canva, ScreenPal. Let's see, Screencast-O-Matic, Camtasia, KindMaster. I'm not familiar with that one. I'm gonna have to look that one up after this session. Edpuzzle, Kaltura, Flip, Loom, wonderful. Lots of really great tools, and I'm actually going to talk about some of these that you've already mentioned in the chat. So if you're already familiar with it, feel free to just add in the chat how you've used it in your personal, in your own personal instructional practices. And then we'll move forward after that. So let's start off with talking head videos. These are probably the easiest types of micro lectures to create, because you basically just open up the camera app on your phone or iPad or computer, and you talk directly to the camera, which is a great way to, once again, foster that instructor presence. So the camera app is great for that. Flip, which I saw someone mention in the chat, is another really easy to use tool that's great for creating micro lectures. And Flip has a web-based version. It also has apps for Android and iOS. So great for you or for your students to be able to create videos. And I would also say talking head videos are best for things like demonstrating skills. So if you're going to be modeling something, a talking head video would be great for that. If it's, content, you probably want to include some sort of visuals to go along with it instead of you just speaking to the camera. So maybe some concrete, things that you can hold up, once again, to build in that multiple modality piece. Another type of micro lecture that you can create is a narrated slideshow. And this is probably what most of us are pretty comfortable with. So tools like Keynote and PowerPoint will allow you to record your slides and then upload that as resources for your students. So with Keynote, you can add audio or video recordings to your slides, and then you can export them as a self-playing movie. So that's kind of what I did in my example earlier, was I just kind of recorded it there. With PowerPoint, you can also record audio narration for your slides, and you can enable your camera and put your video directly on your slide at the same time. So using those built-in audio and video recording tools in Keynote and PowerPoint can be a really great way to create micro lectures for your students. And then screencasts are a really great way to create micro lectures. This is where you're basically recording your screen as you are doing your micro lecture. And screencasts can either be audio only or video, but once again, to foster instructor presence, probably best to have some video there too. And there are so many different options for creating screencasts. So if you have a Mac device, the built-in QuickTime app on your Mac can be used to record your screen. I love Loom, which is a web-based platform for creating screen recordings, and that's what I use for this example that you see here on the slide. There's also Screencastify, which quite a few people mentioned in the chat. ScreenPal, which is the new name for Screencast-O-Matic, also great for recording screencasts. And then quite a few people mentioned in the chat using Zoom and things like that to record your screen too. And then if you have an iPad, it does have a built-in screen recorder that can make it really easy to create micro lectures as well. Another option is to create a digital whiteboard screen recording. So this would be on a tablet like an iPad or Surface or things like that. And so for the iPad, for example, you can use apps like Notes or Freeform, which is a brand new app. It's a digital whiteboarding tool specifically to actually draw out concepts or create sticky notes to explain concepts. So this would be great for creating graphic organizers, concept maps, modeling how to solve problems, handwriting class notes, all of that. And once again, these apps are all built in by default on an iPad or on an iPhone, which makes it really easy to create micro lectures as well. And then if you'd like to make it even fancier, there are tools like Clips and iMovie. These are once again, iPhone and iPad apps and also MacBook for the iMovie, which also makes it easy to create micro lectures that have special effects. So with Clips, for example, you're able to create videos that have posters and filters and text labels and stickers and all sorts of things. With iMovie, you can create more robust video projects that include things like split screen, picture-in-picture, and green screen movies. But once again, it's not necessary to make things super fancy. A simple talking head video can suffice. And then there are tons of interactive tools that can also be used for creating micro lectures, tools like PlayPosit and Edpuzzle, and a few people mentioned that in the chat too. So with these tools, you can either upload an existing video, like one that you've created or one that you find on YouTube, and then you can embed interactive questions throughout them, like open-ended questions or multiple choice questions. So when students watch the video and they get to a point where you've embedded a question, the question will pop up on the screen and students will be prompted to respond to that question before they can continue watching the video. So these tools are great if you want like an all-in-one approach where students are just watching within that one platform and the interactivity is directly built in. And both PlayPosit and Edpuzzle are freemium, meaning that they have a free plan, but they also have some options for paid versions if you want more robust features. So lots of different options of things that you can use. Okay, so let's pause for another chat. And my question for you all in the chat is, what is one new tool that you would be interested in using to create micro lectures? Okay, I'm seeing a lot of votes for PlayPosit and Loom so far. Some said iPad tools, try using Keynote. Wonderful. And I just want to preface this by saying you don't have to use all of these tools, right? So I think it's really best to pick one or two tools that you feel really comfortable with and go deep with those tools. So for me, for example, I tend to mostly use Loom and Keynote for creating instructional videos, but sometimes I'll use some of these other tools as well, depending on the purpose of my video. But I think just knowing that you have these options out there can be, really, really helpful too. All right, so with that, let's move forward. And we're going to talk about planning micro lectures. So whenever you're creating a micro lecture, you want to take some time to plan first. And I have like a 5-step process that I typically recommend people follow when creating their micro lectures. So step 1 would be to actually plan out what you're going to say or do in the micro lecture. Step 2 would be to create or gather any materials that are needed. So things like slides, handouts, other materials. Step 3 would be to record the micro lecture using a tool of your choice. Step 4 is to ensure that the video is captioned for accessibility purposes. And then step 5, of course, would be to share your micro lecture with students or with whoever your learners are. So our session for today is mostly going to focus on step 1, but I'll also share some important tips for the remaining steps as well. And I actually created a template that can help you with planning micro lectures, but I'm going to share that in a moment. But before I share the template, I just want to provide a big picture overview of what you're about to see. So the planning template has three main sections. The first section is pre-planning. So during the pre-planning portion, you're actually determining the course that the micro lecture is going to be based on, the specific topic that the micro lecture will address, once again, focusing on just one concept or skill, the learning objective or objectives that the micro lecture will address, once again, making sure that you can do it in less than 10 minutes, and then the assessment. So what will students do to demonstrate that they've made progress towards your objective? And then the second section of the micro lecture planning template is where you're actually planning out what you're going to do in the beginning, middle, and end of the micro lecture. So for each of these parts, you identify the content that you're going to be teaching along with the interaction. So what will students do to actively engage with that content with their peers or with you? Now, although I've included interaction points for the beginning, middle, and end, there really is no hard and fast rule about how many interaction points you need to have. I personally like to do it in that way because I know that students are doing something throughout, but you can start by just including a meaningful interaction in the beginning, maybe to access students' prior knowledge, or a meaningful interaction at the end to assess their learning. How many interactions you do is 100% up to you. And then the last section of the planning template is where you're figuring out your next steps. So determining the format that you're going to be using for your micro lecture, whether it's going to be a talking head video, a screencast, a digital whiteboard, and then also determining the materials that you're going to need to create, whether those are slides or other resources. So with that, I'm going to give you a moment to access the planning template. I'm going to paste the link in the chat to a Padlet board. And once you're on the Padlet board, you're going to see a few different columns. You're going to go to the column that says micro lecture planning template. And when you scroll down, you'll see two different posts within that column. The first post is if you want the Google Docs version, so you can just follow the directions that are listed right below the little image to be able to access that. And then if you don't have a Google account and you need to download it as a Word or PDF document, you can scroll down and there's a second post that also includes the step-by-step directions for how to access that. So I'm going to pause and give you a moment to access whichever version of the template you'd like. And then feel free to let me know in the chat once you're ready, once you've got the template open on your device. All right, looks like people have it open and ready, so that's great. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and move forward. And what I want to do now is I want to give you some time just to get acquainted with the template. So you just kind of skim it. You'll notice that there are links that you can click on, so feel free to click on the links, skim everything. And while you do that as well, you're going to share some thoughts on the Padlet board. So you'll notice, and I'll put the link to the Padlet in the chat again, that there are columns for I like, I wish, and I wonder. So as you're kind of looking over the Padlet, sorry, as you're looking over the template rather, feel free to share your thoughts in terms of what you like, what you wish, and what you wonder on the board. I'm going to give you about 6 minutes to do this, and there will be some background music playing. So if you prefer to work in silence, feel free to lower the volume or mute your device, and I'll let you know in the chat once we are coming back together. coming down to our last 2 minutes. If you haven't posted your I like, I wish, I wonder on the Padlet board, please feel free to take a moment to do that. All righty, so I have been monitoring the Padlet board on my other device over here, and there are so many great ideas populating the board. And I love that people are responding to each other and sharing their comments and questions. So I am definitely going to read this in detail after the session, and I'll be interacting with you all there. But because of time, I'm going to go ahead and move forward. My hope, though, is that this template will be of use to you or maybe the faculty that you're working with in terms of just knowing like what to think about when designing your micro lectures, and even just having access to ideas of active learning strategies that can be utilized. And some of the questions that are on the board we're going to be talking about in just a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and move forward. And let's go back to our overall outline, right? So we talked about step one, which is planning. And then once you're done planning your micro lecture, once again, you would create the materials, record it, make sure it's captioned, and share it. So I just want to share some helpful tips for these remaining steps of the process. Starting off with recording tips. So Michael Wesch is a very popular educator who's known for his instructional videos. And he created a video called Make Super Simple Videos for Teaching Online. And in this video, he provides a bunch of helpful tips for creating instructional videos. So I just want to share 4 of the tips that he shared in his video. First of all, you want to make sure that when you're recording videos that you have good lighting so that students can see you and whatever other instructional materials you're using really clearly. You also want to make sure that your audio is clear, and this doesn't require buying fancy equipment, but sometimes even just, plugging in the headphones or earbuds that come with your phone can be a really helpful way to minimize the background noise that you might have when you're recording. Along with that, you want to make sure that you're using a stable recording setup. So if you're recording on your computer, you want to put it on, a flat surface so it's not going to move around too much. If you're recording with a phone or with an iPad, it's best to use a tripod that can keep that stable so that people who are watching aren't going to feel queasy when they're watching it. And then lastly, he really encourages people to embrace mistakes and not feel like their video has to be absolutely perfect. And I wanted to share this quote from Flower Darby, who's the author of the book Small Teaching Online. And just like Wesch, she stresses that videos don't have to be perfect. So this is what she says. Students prefer informal videos in which you are authentic to stiff, formal, or professionally edited videos. They want to see and hear you being you. You needn't record and re-record until you achieve the perfectly polished presentation. Do you always articulate every word perfectly when teaching in the classroom? If not, don't worry about doing so in your instructional videos. So I hope this gives you permission to let go of the need for your videos to be perfect, because I know I struggle with that. I am 100% a perfectionist, and I'm always like, oh, but I messed up a word. And even the sample video that I showed you earlier, I was just like, oh man, I could hear every mistake. But as I think it's Emily, and please correct me if I'm wrong. She says the imperfect helps the students feel connected. And yes, that's what the research shows as well, that it actually makes us humanized when we make mistakes. And in case you're still not convinced, I'm going to share another quote from Michelle Pacansky-Brock, Michael Schmedshammer, and Kim Vincent-Layton that also gets at the same point. So it says, when professors portray their imperfections, the ums, quizzical expressions, background interruptions like a cat jumping on the desk or a child peeping in the background, and move away from their desks to record in their daily settings, they become real and relatable. In other words, they become humanized. Students begin to sense that their online instructor is a real person with imperfections and a busy life, much like them. And although this quote mentions online instructors, I think it definitely applies to any modality, right? If you're creating videos, we want to make sure that our students see us as real people. Karen Costa also wrote a really fantastic book called 99 Tips for Creating Simple and Sustainable Educational Videos. And she provides a ton of really helpful guidance for making sure that your videos are usable, beyond that one term. So I just want to share 3 of her tips with you all today. Tip 36 is forget Hollywood. And this is the idea that, once again, your videos don't have to be these high quality productions with all the bells and whistles. You can start with just turning on your camera and talking to the camera and recording that, or start with something like Loom where you're recording your screen and then upload that as a resource for your students. Another tip that she shares is the camera will eat your energy. So here, Costa really recommends being a bit more animated. Okay, so I think I was on the camera will eat your energy. So try to be a little bit more energetic than normal. And then tip 63, and this one's really helpful, is keep it general. So this is really important if you want to be able to reuse your micro lectures and not have to record them every semester. So Costa recommends that you avoid including super specific details in your micro lecture. So not mentioning things like due dates or holidays or the time of year. Just tell students in your videos, refer to the syllabus or refer to the LMS. And that way you can keep things, keep it evergreen, as Erica just mentioned in the chat. And she also mentions throughout her book, it can be imperfect. So once again, it doesn't have to be perfect when you're making your instructional videos. And then along with that, we really think about accessibility when we are creating our instructional videos, whether it's videos we're making or videos that we're having students watch. It's super important to make sure that those videos are captioned. So I'm going to post another question for you all in the chat, and that is, which students benefit from captions? So please share your thoughts in the chat. And you all got it right. That was a trick question, right? Because captions are beneficial for every single learner. So they are essential for students who are deaf and hard of hearing and students who have other hearing impairments, but they're also beneficial for other learners too. So I want to share a little bit of data from 3Play Media, which is a digital accessibility company. And they actually did a survey of about 165 people to find out, do you use captions? And if so, what do you use them for? And they actually found that 98% of people said that they use captions whenever they're watching videos, and only 25% of people do so because of a hearing impairment. So once again, most of the people that are using captions, it's not because of a hearing need by any need. So I want to share some of the reasons that they provided here, and this resource is also linked in the resources you'll get at the end. So 47% of people said that they use captions because it helps them focus. 45% said that it lets them watch videos in noisy environments. 45% said that it helps them decipher thick accents or mumbled speech. 28% said that it helps them understand the language. 28% said that it lets them watch videos in quiet environments. 25% said that it accommodates a hearing disability. 15% said that it helps them learn new vocabulary. 14% said that it accommodates a learning disability. And 6% had other reasons. So I think a lot of these reasons that have been shared show that it really is helpful for even just deepening students' learning of the content when we have those captions enabled. So how can you make sure that your videos are captioned? I'm just going to share a few ideas here really quickly. One of my personal favorite tools for creating videos that have the captions like hardwired on there is the Clips app, which is for iPhones and iPads. You basically turn on a feature called live titles, and then as you're talking, the captions will appear on the screen. Another tool that can assist with captions is YouTube. When you upload a video, it will automatically generate captions as well. Now, with both of these tools, the auto-generated captions, it's never enough to just be like, okay, the auto-generated captions are there, I'm good to go, I've done my thing. In order for the videos to truly be accessible, the captions have to be accurate. And what I love about both of these is that you do have the ability to edit the captions. So I can go into my live titles and I can make any punctuation or capitalization or spelling corrections I need to. Same thing with YouTube. And I've included resources about how to edit captions for these platforms in the resources you'll get at the end. Along with that, if you use Loom as a screen capture tool, it actually has transcripts and captions built into it. So whenever you record a video in Loom, you'll see a little sidebar on the right, and one of the tabs is transcript, and it will bring up an auto-generated transcript. You can go in and edit the transcript, and any edits that you make to the transcript are automatically reflected in the captions, which a user can enable simply by tapping on the CC icon. So it's great to see a lot of EdTech tools that are really being more intentional about building this into the design of the actual videos. And then lastly, we want to think about how we're going to share this with our students. And there's a few common ways that you can do this. One option is embedding the video in your LMS, like Canvas or Brightspace or whatever other LMS you're using. You might also want to think about making a YouTube playlist so students have a one-stop shop for all of the videos from your session. And then another really helpful tip that Christina Moore talks about in her new book, Mobile Mindful Teaching and Learning, is including the length of the video in the title and or link so that students know just by looking at it how much time they're going to need a budget to spend. So once again, it helps with that executive functioning in terms of planning and being able to, set aside appropriate time to do what you need to do. All right, so with that, we're going to wrap up with an action plan and reflection. And yes, Catherine, that is a UDL principle right there. I have to always bring that into what I do. So I'm going to put the link to the Padlet board in the chat again now. And as we're wrapping, feel free to go over to the far right and you'll see some columns for action plan and reflection. So I'd love for you to share an action plan item. How do you plan to use something that you learned today in your practice? Or reflection, and the reflection is using the I used to think, now I think routine. So what did you used to think about micro lectures or instructional videos, and how has your thinking about that changed? So feel free to share your closing thoughts there as we wrap up. And I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up now. So you can now hopefully describe the characteristics and benefits of micro lectures, identify different tools that can be used to create micro lectures, and then describe important factors to consider when recording and sharing micro lectures. And I want to share this additional quote from Darby, who says, start with one mini lecture video. Is there a concept that has always been hard to convey in your online class or other modality? There's the subject of your first mini lecture video. Next time you teach that class, add a couple more. So start small and you can always build from there. So I have created a web page with tons of resources related to this workshop. You can either click on the link in the chat or scan the QR code that's here on the slide to access that. And I will also add the Padlet to that after this session too. One of the resources that you'll find on the webpage is an article that I wrote for Faculty Focus called Micro Lectures 101, What, Why, and How. And it has a lot of what we talked about in today's session. So it's a great resource if you want to review anything that we've talked about. Along with that, you're going to find a link to a Wakelet board. So I've put together a collection of dozens of articles, EdTech tools, ideas, video design principles, all of that in one place so that if you want to look into any of the topics that we've discussed further, you can do that here. And one of the resources that's linked on the Wakelet that I wanted to highlight is the micro lecture peer review rubric. So if you're interested in using this to, evaluate your own micro lectures and revise them for the future, this is a really great resource that's once again part of that Wakelet. I'd also love to stay in touch with you all. So you can find me on Twitter, LinkedIn, or via my website. And I've posted my contact information in the chat. You're also able to scan any of the QR codes here, which will take you directly to each of those social media platforms. And last but not least, I would love to get your feedback about this session. So you can either click on the link that I just posted in the chat or scan the QR code, which will take you to a brief Google form. And I welcome any thoughts you have about today's session. I also just want to say thank you all so much for coming. Thank you for your engagement. I'm super excited to go back to the Padlet board and respond and see what everyone's posted there. And I hope you're walking away with at least one new idea for how you can level up your micro lecture game with your students or other learners. I see a hand up. Is it Jonathan?
Yeah, I just wondered if you, thank you so much. I just
Yeah.
wondered if you ever felt, you said you sometimes use it, as part of an online course, sometimes as a pre-post, sometimes as a supplement. I just wondered, did you ever feel like it gave permission for students to skip class and then just watch, do the micro lessons and not feel the need to come to the face-to-face?
I think it all depends on how you structure it. So if it's something that you're doing before class and you tell students, this is just so that I know what I need to maybe adapt in the lesson, then they can't necessarily miss class because the content in the class is not going to be the same as what's covered in the micro lecture. So I think a lot of it has to do with how you position it and what you're telling students in terms of how it's going to be used. And then of course, if it's a fully online class, then they're just using that as their part of their typical instructional materials. Great question. Thank you all so much for coming. Appreciate it. And once again, I'll add the Padlet board to the website so you have access to that, and I'll also go in and comment. And please feel free to reach out if I can assist with anything moving forward too.